There is a version of you that already knows the truth before your conscious mind ever catches up to it. I want you to really absorb that sentence, because most people spend their entire lives ignoring the one voice inside them that has never once lied to them, their own mind, quietly, persistently, trying to protect them. We like to think of ourselves as rational creatures, making careful, logical decisions about who to trust and who to walk away from. But that's not actually how it works. Long before your logical brain catches up with reality, your subconscious has already been collecting evidence. It's already been noticing the micro expressions, the inconsistencies, the way someone's story shifts slightly depending on who's listening, and it tries to warn you. It sends you signals, a tightness in your chest, a sudden wave of unease, a thought that flashes through your mind and disappears just as quickly. And most of us? We ignore it. We talk ourselves out of it. We say, I'm probably overthinking this. And we go right back to smiling, right back to trusting, right back to explaining away something our own mind just tried to protect us from. Today, I want to walk you through 5 of these warning behaviors, not behaviors other people show, but behaviors your own mind shows you. Signals so easy to dismiss that most people never even realize they're being warned at all until it's too late. Let's start with the first one, because it's probably the most common and the most dangerously easy to explain away: the sudden, unexplained tightening in your body when a certain person's name comes up, or when they walk into a room, or when your phone lights up with their contact name. I'm not talking about excitement. I'm talking about that specific, almost imperceptible clench in your stomach, your jaw, your shoulders, that happens a half second before your conscious mind has even processed why. This is not random. This is your nervous system, which has been quietly tracking every interaction you've ever had with this person, sending you a flare. Your body remembers things your mind hasn't consciously cataloged yet. It remembers the tone of voice that preceded an argument. It remembers the pattern of promises that were broken. It remembers the specific kind of silence that came right before things got difficult. And so when that person appears again, your body reacts before your mind has the chance to rationalize, to remember all the good times, to talk itself back into safety. Most people feel this tightening and immediately override it. They think, why am I so anxious around someone I love? That doesn't make sense. And instead of listening to the discomfort, they punish themselves for feeling it. But I want you to consider something radical. What if the discomfort isn't the problem? What if the discomfort is the solution, trying to reach you, and the real problem is that you've been trained to distrust your own instincts more than you distrust the people who created them? The second behavior is one that's much quieter, much harder to catch, and it's this: the reflex to immediately defend someone in your own head before anyone has even accused them of anything. Have you ever noticed that? Someone hasn't said a single critical word about this person, and yet you're already rehearsing the defense. You're already thinking, well, they've had a hard life, or you don't understand them like I do, or they didn't mean it like that. This reflex is worth paying very close attention to, because healthy relationships don't require a legal defense team running in your head at all times. If you find yourself constantly, preemptively justifying someone's behavior, even in moments when nobody is questioning it but you, that is your mind revealing something it hasn't said out loud yet. It's telling you that some part of you already suspects this person's actions don't hold up under scrutiny, and it's trying to get ahead of that realization by building the defense before the trial even starts. This is exhausting work, by the way. Defending someone constantly, even silently, even just inside your own thoughts, takes an enormous amount of psychological energy. And ask yourself honestly, if this person's behavior were actually fine, would you need to defend it this much, this often, to an audience that isn't even asking? The third behavior is the way your memory starts to blur, specifically around moments that upset you. You'll notice this most clearly after an argument or a hurtful interaction. You go to explain what happened to a friend, or even just to yourself, and suddenly the details feel foggy. You remember that you were upset. You remember the general shape of what happened, but the specifics have gone soft around the edges, almost deliberately so. This isn't forgetfulness. This is your mind protecting you from the full weight of what actually happened, because holding on to it clearly would force you to confront something you're not ready to confront. This is the same mechanism that makes people minimize things in real time. It wasn't that bad. I'm probably exaggerating. I think I'm remembering it worse than it was. And here's the unsettling part. The people who are the safest to be around rarely produce this kind of memory fog, because safe interactions don't require your brain to protect you from them. It's specifically the painful, confusing, destabilizing moments that get blurred because clarity in those moments would be too costly to carry around. If you notice yourself constantly unable to clearly recall the details of arguments or hurtful moments with a specific person, that fog is not evidence that things weren't bad. It's evidence that your mind decided you couldn't afford to remember exactly how bad they were. The fourth behavior is something I think almost everyone has experienced but very few people name correctly. The compulsive urge to over-explain yourself, to justify decisions you never used to have to justify, to preface simple statements with disclaimers, apologies, or qualifiers you never used before this person entered your life. Listen to how you talk when this person is involved. Are you saying things like, "I hope this doesn't sound bad, but," or "I'm not trying to start anything, or explaining, in exhausting detail, the reasoning behind decisions that used to require no explanation at all? This pattern doesn't come out of nowhere. It develops because somewhere along the way, your simple, unqualified statements were met with disproportionate reactions, anger, guilt-tripping, cold withdrawal, accusations of overreacting or being dramatic. And so your mind adapted. It started building in protective padding before every interaction because it learned that saying things plainly wasn't safe anymore. This over-explaining isn't a personality trait. It's a trained response to an environment that punished directness. And once you start noticing it, you'll realize how much energy you're spending just trying to make your existence, your needs, your simple preferences palatable enough not to trigger a negative reaction. The fifth behavior, and maybe the most important one to catch, is what I'd call the phantom argument. The way you find yourself having entire conversations with this person in your head, hours or even days after an actual interaction ended. You're doing dishes, driving, trying to fall asleep, and suddenly you're mentally replaying something they said, constructing the perfect response you didn't think of in the moment, defending yourself against accusations that were never resolved. This happens because something about the original interaction left you feeling unheard, dismissed, or unfairly characterized, and your mind, desperate for resolution it never got, keeps replaying the scene, trying to find an ending that actually makes sense. Healthy interactions rarely produce this loop because they resolve. There's no unfinished business haunting your evening because the conversation, even if difficult, reached some kind of honest conclusion. But when interactions leave you constantly reopening old conversations in your imagination, searching for the words you should have said, that's your mind telling you that something about the relationship keeps leaving you unresolved, unseen, and unsatisfied, and it's trying in its own exhausting way to finish something the relationship itself never lets you finish. Here's what I want you to take from all 5 of these signals before we go any further, because I think it's the single most important reframe I can offer you. None of these behaviors are flaws in you. They are not signs that you're anxious or dramatic or overthinking or too sensitive, all the labels you've probably been given, or worse, the labels you've started giving yourself. These are adaptive responses. Your mind built them because at some point they were necessary. The tightening in your chest, the pre-built defenses, the memory fog, the compulsive over-explaining, the phantom arguments. Every single one of these developed for a reason, and that reason was you, trying to keep yourself safe in an environment that required constant vigilance. The tragedy isn't that your mind does these things. The tragedy is how many of us have been taught to override them, to silence them, to apologize for having them, instead of asking the far more important question, what has been happening to me, that my own mind felt the need to build all of this protection in the first place? What has been happening to me, that my own mind felt the need to build all of this protection in the first place? That question is where real healing actually begins, because until you ask it, you'll keep treating the symptoms, the anxiety, the over-explaining, the fog, as the problem itself, instead of recognizing them as evidence of something that needs to change. And I want to walk you through what happens next, because recognizing these 5 behaviors is only step 1. Step 2, the much harder step, is learning to actually trust them instead of talking yourself out of them the way you've probably been doing for years. Here's the thing about a mind that's been trained to protect you. Once it starts sending signals, it doesn't stop just because you ignore it. It gets louder, it gets more creative. If the tightening in your chest doesn't get your attention, you might start noticing sleep disruption. If the phantom arguments don't wake you up to what's happening, you might start noticing your body producing physical symptoms, headaches before you see this person, a stomach that won't settle on the drive to their house, an exhaustion that has nothing to do with how much sleep you got. This is not your body betraying you. This is your body escalating because it's been trying to tell you something important and you've been changing the channel every single time. I think a lot of people live years, sometimes decades, of their lives in a kind of low-grade static, a constant hum of unease they've simply learned to live inside of, because acknowledging it directly feels more frightening than tolerating it forever. But tolerating it isn't neutral, it has a cost. It's slowly, quietly, teaching you that your own perception cannot be trusted. And that is one of the most disorienting things a person can be taught. Because once you stop trusting your own mind, you become entirely dependent on other people to tell you what's real. And guess who's usually most willing to fill that gap? The very people whose behavior triggered the warning signs in the first place. So let's talk about how you actually start reversing this, because awareness without action just becomes another form of rumination, and I don't want to leave you there. The first thing you have to do, and I know this sounds almost too simple, but it is genuinely the hardest part, is start treating your body's signals as data instead of overreaction. When that tightness shows up in your chest, instead of immediately asking, "Why am I like this?" start asking, "What just happened right before I felt this?" Get specific. Was it a comment? A tone shift? A promise that didn't hold up for the third time this month? You're not trying to build a court case against anyone. You're trying to build a pattern, because patterns are the only thing that can cut through the fog your mind has been generously providing you as a form of protection. One bad moment doesn't tell you much. 10 bad moments, written down honestly, in your own words, close to the time they happened, before your memory has a chance to soften them. That tells you almost everything. The second thing you need to do is give yourself explicit permission to stop performing the defense attorney role you've been playing, sometimes for years, entirely inside your own head. This one is uncomfortable because it can feel like betrayal. Like you're being disloyal by simply allowing yourself to notice without immediately justifying, without immediately softening it with context about their childhood or their bad week or their stress at work. Context matters, yes, but context is not the same thing as an excuse, and somewhere along the way, a lot of us were taught to treat them as interchangeable. You are allowed to understand why someone became who they are and still hold them accountable for how they treat you today. Those two things are not in conflict. Compassion for someone's past does not obligate you to keep absorbing their present. The third thing, and this is the one most people resist the hardest, is learning to sit inside unresolved conversations without needing to finish them. Remember that phantom argument loop we talked about? The one where you're replaying old conversations, building the perfect comeback, searching for the ending that never came? At some point, you have to accept that some conversations were never going to resolve the way you needed them to, not because you didn't say the right words, but because the other person was never actually engaging in good faith to begin with. You cannot logic your way into a resolution with someone who benefits from the conversation staying unresolved. Some people don't want closure, because closure would require accountability, and accountability would require them to see themselves clearly, which is exactly the thing they've spent their whole life avoiding. The moment you stop trying to write the perfect ending to a conversation that was never designed to have one, you get to reclaim all those hours, all that mental energy, all those quiet moments in the car or in bed at night that used to belong to someone who wasn't even thinking about you at all. And the fourth thing, maybe the most important, is this: you have to slowly, deliberately, start speaking to yourself the way you'd speak to someone you love who came to you with these exact 5 signals. If your closest friend told you they felt a tightening in their chest every time a certain person's name came up, would you tell them they were overreacting? If they told you they were constantly rehearsing conversations that never got resolved, would you call them dramatic? Of course not. You would tell them their mind was trying to protect them. You would tell them to listen. And I need you to extend that exact same grace to yourself, because you deserve the same compassionate, clear-eyed advice you'd hand out freely to anyone else standing in your position. Here's what I really want you to understand. Underneath all five of these signals, underneath the science of it, underneath the psychology, your mind was never your enemy. Not once. Every single behavior we talked about today was your own nervous system doing exactly what it was built to do. Keep you alive, keep you oriented, keep you one step ahead of pain it had already learned to recognize. The tragedy was never that these signals existed. The tragedy was how long you were taught to distrust the very system that was working overtime to protect you. Somewhere along the way, you learned to call your intuition anxiety. You learned to call your self-protection dramatic. You learned to call your own accurate perception overthinking because someone benefited from you doubting yourself more than you doubted them. But that ends the moment you start listening again. Picture this for a second. Somewhere out there tonight, someone is lying awake, replaying a conversation that never resolved, feeling that same tightness in their chest, already rehearsing the defense for someone who hasn't even been accused of anything yet. And maybe, for the first time, instead of dismissing it, instead of calling themselves too sensitive, they're going to pause. They're going to ask the question we asked at the very beginning. What has been happening to me, that my mind felt the need to protect me like this? And in that single pause, in that one moment of choosing to listen instead of override, something shifts. Quietly. Permanently. Because once you learn to trust your own signals again, you can never fully go back to ignoring them. You'll catch things faster. You'll excuse less. You'll stop mistaking familiarity for safety and stop mistaking chaos for chemistry. And maybe that's you right now. Maybe somewhere in the last 20 minutes, you recognized one of these five signals in your own life, a tightness you've been dismissing, a defense you've been building for someone who was never on trial, a memory that's gone strangely soft around the edges, an apology you didn't need to give, a conversation you're still trying to finish in your head at 2 a.m. If that's you, I want you to know something important before we close this out. You were never broken for noticing. You were never too much for feeling it. Your mind wasn't malfunctioning. It was working exactly as it was designed to, trying, in the only language it has, to bring you home to yourself. So the next time that tightness rises in your chest, don't reach for the explanation that makes it disappear. Reach for the truth it's trying to hand you. Because your mind has been speaking to you this whole time, patient and unwavering, waiting for the one moment you finally decide to listen, and that moment, the one where you stop overriding yourself and start trusting what you've known all along, is the exact moment you finally, truly come home.